And now I'd like to welcome our special guest and dear friend of mine, Dr. Lisa Hinkelman, founder and director of ROCKS, Ruling Our Experiences. Dr. Hinkelman is a nationally recognized researcher, speaker, author, who is a foremost authority on educating and empowering girls and creating environments that foster girls' confidence, self-esteem, and successful decision-making. Take it away, Lisa.
Thank you. I'm so excited to have a little time with you today. I, like many of you, I'm in my home office and was so excited to plan to join you in person, but I'm glad to have the opportunity to share some information, research, and tips with you. I really shifted from what I was planning to do to be more responsive to what's actually happening in our lives right now for both us and the girls who we serve. So I'm going to talk a little bit about being stuck at home and what are some of the challenges that are facing both us and girls, and what are some of the things that we can do to connect with them, to support them, and to help them thrive during this really difficult time. Next slide. So I'm sure I know many of you. I've had the chance to connect with Girl Scouts through my work at Ruling Our Experiences, also called ROCKS. And we are a nonprofit headquartered here in Columbus and we're focused on equipping girls with the skills they need to navigate their worlds a little differently. And so for us, we are creating generations of confident girls who control their own relationships, experiences, decisions, and futures. And what's so cool about this is that we have this area of overlap with Girl Scouts. In portions of our work is a shared mission. We train professionals to implement our programming in schools. So our programming is primarily delivered through school counselors and school social workers who work with girls throughout a 20-week program on confidence and self-esteem, but also on violence prevention and dealing with sexual harassment and career development. We teach all of the girls self-defense. So I know we've had the chance to do a lot of collaborative programming with the Girl Scouts. And so I think it's probably been for the last 9 or 10 years, I've been fortunate enough to have Tammy as a professional colleague and a friend. And we've been able to do so much work together for the good of girls in our community. The other piece that we do is large-scale national research, and we conduct surveys and focus groups and interviews with girls across the country, and I'm going to share a bit with you about some of the things that we are learning about girls' experiences and some of the things that girls want and need from the adults in their lives. And then the last piece that we do is we look to equip the adults who impact and influence girls' lives with tools and strategies so that their connections are more meaningful, more relevant, and timely to what girls are actually dealing with. Next slide, please. So what I was planning to talk to you about is like all of the research about what's actually going on for girls, because what we know is that their lives were complicated before COVID-19. And this crisis has only made things a bit more complex. But when we did this research survey with just under 11,000 girls, we found that there were specific areas of their lives where they felt like things were most complicated. When it comes to confidence, and I'm sure this is a statistic that you've seen before, girls experience a pretty marked decline in their self-confidence between 5th and 9th grade. And what we saw was about a 26% drop. And what we also saw was that it didn't recover. And so between those critical years, girls are struggling profoundly. And after that decline, they sort of just hang out in that space of not feeling super confident in their bodies and their abilities and their relationships. So we know that there's an opportunity for us to hit those younger girls at a place early on so that we can help sustain their confidence, but then also, as we're watching the slide, be able to impact and influence girls who are experiencing the confidence drop so that we can bolster them in ways that help them move through their worlds more efficaciously. The other piece that we found, and I'm sure for all of you who have girls and are working with girls, is that girls' relationships are complicated. And while relationships are one of the things that girls and women need to thrive and to be successful and to be well adjusted, it also is one of the areas that girls say is one of the most complicated in their lives. From the time girls are in 5th grade all the way through 12th, when we ask them an open-ended question about the big issues impacting their lives, the number one response we hear is drama. And when we look at what drama actually is, we know that it's relationships, we know that it's conflict, it's tension that often exists between and among girls. And so it's interesting to think about something that is so necessary for our health and well-being is also the thing that can be most complicated during our growing up years, and sometimes actually, when we're adults as well. The other thing that I'm sure all of you are dealing with, and if you've been working for girls for any long period of time, you'll know that social media has completely transformed our work with them and the way that they interact, the way that they connect, the experiences that they're having, the way that they feel about themselves and their bodies. And so what we see is girls' social media use increases obviously as they get older, but by the time they get to high school, most girls are spending 6 hours each day using social media. And the girls who spend the most time using social media are also the most likely to report the highest levels of sadness and depression. So girls who spend 8 or more hours a day, it's correlated to the highest levels of sadness and depression. Now, I'm interested in understanding how social media use is shifting right now during this time, because probably like most of us, they're on their devices even more than before. And so the impact of this will be interesting to pay attention to while it's happening, but also then at the end. The last two things that came up as highest issues for girls are weight and body image and stress and pressure. And despite the fact that we are in some ways cultivating environments of inclusivity and less body shame and more acceptance of different body styles and shapes and athleticism, weight and body image is still one of the top things that girls report as a frustration and a concern for them. And what we actually saw was that the more increased girls' desire to change how they look, the lower their self-confidence was. So we know that there's a relationship there that's really important and critical that we pay attention to. Stress and pressure is where I'm ending this bullet point, because I think that right now we're experiencing a unique snapshot of girls having to learn new skills to manage their stress and pressure during an unprecedented time. And what is so complicated about this is that for us as adults, we don't even have the skills right now to know what to do or how to help them, because we're trying to figure it out ourselves. Next slide. So here's the deal. We're all adjusting to this new normal. And this uncertain environment, to me, feels wild. And it feels like from day to day, what's the right thing to do? What is the new information that's coming? How long can I plan out my personal life, my professional life? What should I be doing with the people who I work with? All of the things just feel this place of uncertainty. And we know that uncertainty breeds anxiety in every aspect of our life. In our relationships, if we're in relationships that are uncertain and not predictable, it makes us feel anxious. And when we're in environments or situations in our work employment and we're engaging with people who are unpredictable or we don't know how they're going to react, it breeds anxiety. And so right now, for most of us, our environments are pretty uncertain. The other thing is that there's a limited opportunity for us to do all of the things that bring us joy, or many of the things that bring us joy, or calm, or stress relief, or pleasure. And so what's happening for girls is that they're not able to do some of the things that they really, really were excited about, like their spring sports, or come to Girl Scout meetings, see their friends, do all of the things that are really important developmental milestones. When I think about the girls who are, they're missing their proms, they're missing their graduations, they're thinking about likely missing freshman orientation and going back to and starting college. They're missing some of the things that many have been looking forward to for a very long time. And the reality is that that stuff matters intensely for them right now. I think it's sometimes easy for us to look back and be like, okay, so like the prom actually wasn't that big of a deal, or high school graduation, that was fine, but then college graduation was so much more important, or you'll get to play a sport, you'll get to play your sport again next year. We have to recognize that for them, these milestones are really the biggest milestones that they've ever had the chance to be part of. They haven't yet had the bigger ones that will come as they get older. And so their reaction to these important milestones is critical that we attend to with empathy and with care, because they don't have the skills to navigate it. One of the other pieces of the new normal is decreased peer interaction and support. This could be positive or negative, or a little bit of both. What we're hearing from some girls is that now that they're not in school, some of the drama is gone. So some of the tension that they were experiencing with other girls is not something that they're experiencing right now, because their interactions have been limited. And so there are some positives when girls have the chance to create some distance in this physical way from others who maybe weren't supportive, or maybe there was competition. But more so, it's negative, because that peer interaction and network of support is often very sustaining for our girls. Increased family time is the other thing that's also positive and negative, and I'm sure many of you are experiencing this too, is that you're with these people all day, every day. And unless you have a chance to get out, go for a walk, or maybe you're working outside the home at this point, you're getting your fill of family time in all of the ways. Now, some people frame this as like this once in a lifetime opportunity to make all these great connections and memories, and we're going to learn new things together, and we're going to, journal our experiences, and we're never going to get this time back, which is nice. But there's also families that are full of tension and stress, maybe in places where home doesn't feel particularly safe. Maybe environments where increased family time is also increasing the stress. And so we have to recognize that for some, where this feels like this moment that's moving slow and is wonderful to capture, that's not the case for all who we're working with and influencing. And so we have to be sure that our experience of working from home and maybe adjusting well and navigating health in a healthy way might not be the experience of the girls that we're working with. We also know that there tends to be no breaks or time to decompress. It's like, for me, it's like the drive home back and forth to work was like my time to like get my head straight after that day, to get ready for what's to come next. And at this point, I just like walk upstairs, and then the next phase of life begins. And so that decompression, I'm learning, is really an important thing for me. I'm doing a lot of walking right now, and I think that people are joking a lot. My dog is getting more walks than he really cares to get at this point. Next slide. So here's where I want to help you think about when you're interacting with girls. I know that some of you are doing virtual meetings via Zoom with your girls. You have girls that are in your home. When we want to look at, like, how do we know that something is wrong? The difference between, okay, we're just adjusting to this new normal, and my girl's actually not doing well. Here's some of the things that we would pay attention to. So schoolwork is declining. So right now, we know that that is chaotic and looks different in different environments. Some school districts have very robust mechanisms where kids are engaged for hours each day. Some schools have packets that you have to go pick up. Some schools are struggling to get online access for girls. So if we're noticing that our girl is completely disengaged with school, and not even just because of this issue, but she's tired, she's sick, she doesn't want to engage in any way, and we're watching the grades slip and the disinterest increase, that would be a signal like, I got to pay attention to this further. Also, when we see like massive mood shifts and changes, and I'm not talking about the mood changes that are kind of typical of adolescence. I'm talking about mood changes that are intense, that are severe, and that could be rapid. Of like one moment she seems like super happy and excited, and the next moment she's angry and she's crying and she's seemingly to have a difficult time regulating her emotions. When we also see signs of distress, it would be a lack of interest in the things that she's typically interested in. The hobbies, the movies, the sports, the things that particularly bring her joy, she's losing interest in. And also watching physical appearance changes. So I know I hear a lot of people talking about like, working from home, you're kind of like in your pajamas and might just like change your top for your Zoom meetings, or, you know, that you could just, you know, wear your leggings for the next, you know, couple of weeks. And so we have that expectation in this space. But if we're just watching a decline in hygiene or even care about how we're treating our bodies and ourselves. Some other things would be watching for depression and anxiety, forgetfulness, and some unusual sleeping, like I'm sleeping all the time or I'm not sleeping at all. These are general signs of distress, whether or not a girl is isolated at home, but we would see these present themselves a little differently when we have like constant access to seeing what she's doing and how she's coping. Next slide. So I want to give a few strategies to help us think about what we can do in these spaces. And one of the areas is that the more isolation that someone experiences, the more psychological distress that they experience. And so right now, we're seeing that all of us, in many ways, are becoming very isolated. And we have to recognize that increases psychological distress. So we have to concurrently look for ways to increase communication and engagement, both for ourselves and for our girls. Because isolation, right, and staying away from the people that bring us joy or comfort or support keeps us in our own heads. And so when we think about the psychological distress, for example, that something as severe as like a prisoner of war or someone who's in isolation, who's incarcerated, we know that psychologically they come out of that in such a bad space. Similarly, when we develop depression or anxiety, we tend to isolate. And that isolation only increases our experience. So let's find ways to help girls communicate and engage with others. And obviously we're using technology in massive ways to help that happen at this point. And we need to continue to do that, even if they're reluctant. And we want them to engage not just in chatting or Snapchat, but in virtual and dynamic interactions, which means I'm seeing you and you're seeing me, and we are interacting in a way that is supportive, but also enhancing our social skills. Because one of the developmental tasks that teens are losing at this time is development of social skills, because they're not engaging in the typical ways and going through some of the typical developmental tasks that we would expect. I think it's important that we also are giving girls to make decisions so that they're in control of something. Right now, life is feeling very out of control. It is for all of us, and it is for our girls too, where the simple things that they previously could have elicited control over, they now have none. And so my encouragement is, what are the places in your house, in your troop, in your exchanges with them, where they have some agency, so that they feel like in an uncontrollable situation, they still have some opportunities to make some decisions. For all of us, feeling out of control is an overwhelming experience, but having places and opportunities to feel like my voice matters, my opinion matters, we want to elevate those, even if they're really small sorts of things, like what are we having for dinner, or what should we do this evening, or what time would you like to go for a walk, or I'd like you to think about how you want to do this, instead of here's what you're doing, here's your schedule, I've already mapped it out, it's color coded on the refrigerator, this is what we're eating, this is what you're wearing. Give her some opportunities to feel like she still has some control. The other thing is that we want to make sure that they're still enjoying things that bring them joy. And that's kind of hard right now. So we have to get really creative of how can girls stay engaged with hobbies or sports or crafts? How can we help them use their creative minds in ways that continue to develop those aspects of their life and continue to hone the skills that perhaps they had been working on religiously up until this point? I think about athletes, and I was a softball pitcher, and the idea of taking off months of my sport is heartbreaking to think about. But then also what comes back with if I missed those chances to continue my growth and development, what does that mean for what's going to happen for me when it does come back around? So what are the places where she can continue to develop and craft and hone the skills and the interests that she really loves? The other piece is, all this connection is really wonderful, but we all also need time to be alone. And so ensuring that we and she has some time to be by herself with her thoughts, to decompress. This is especially important for the introverts among us, right? Is that for introverts, energy is refreshed and rejuvenated by the alone time. For extroverts, being with people and talking and engaging is where we get our energy rejuvenated. And so getting time alone is particularly important for your girls and for you who are more introverted. The last piece is to figure out ways to create meaning and purpose, right? And you see a lot of people starting to do this now with assisting with food deliveries or assisting with sewing masks, and disseminating those and delivering those to hospitals and others who are in need. We, as you all know, and Girl Scouts does such a great job of this, is figuring out how to help girls connect with their meaning and their purpose, because that's life sustaining. And to feel like in an uncontrollable situation, we are still figuring out ways to add value to the world is a very critical element. Next slide. Here's a couple of last things that I want to share, is that we have to show the girls that we care. And simply by telling them that, like, I'm worried about you and I'm here if you want to talk. We have to acknowledge that this situation is hard and empathize with them. So instead of saying like, oh my gosh, it's hard for all of us, we're all, just deal with it. We have to say things like, this is hard for all of us, but I'm struggling too, to know sometimes what to do or how to feel. So let's figure out how we're going to do this together. I think sometimes we diminish the experiences and authentic feelings of girls. And in this moment, we want to recognize that they might have a hard time articulating what they're feeling, identifying their feelings, and they might have a hard time sharing that with you because it's maybe not typical for them to do that. So we want to create the space and the conditions for them to say, you know what, like, this is hard and I totally miss my friends. And I really wanted to go to the 8th grade dance and now that's canceled. And what are we going to do with my dress? And, the stuff that is real for them, we have to acknowledge and share in that sadness, in that grief, in that, and sometimes it's frustration or anger that they're experiencing as well. And all of those emotions are legitimate and authentic, and we have to acknowledge that those are real. The last thing is that for many of our girls, when they're out at school, they have access to more support services than they do right now. One of the things that we're seeing is a decrease in child abuse reporting. And that is not because child abuse is happening any less. In fact, it could be argued that girls who are experiencing abuse may be even at a higher risk right now, because they're not around the support services who would recognize and intervene in situations like this. So I think it's important that for those of you who have access to girls and who have access to networks of support can help your girls connect to their school counselor or school social worker. I work a lot with school counselors and social workers, and they are missing their students massively, and they're available to work with them in any capacity, obviously virtually, but they're still there. And so figuring out how to reach out to them if your girls need support in that way. Also, you might not be the person, if you're the parent, that the girl wants to talk to all the time about the stuff that she's going through. So who are the other people? Is it your sister? Is it her grandma? Is it her troop leader or another caring adult that you trust that you can make sure has a meaningful connection to your girl right now? I also included the numbers of a couple crisis hotlines if you find the need to pass these on to the girls that you're working with. The first is a call-in hotline. The second one is a text hotline because, as you know right now, girls and many would rather text than talk. And those are ways to gain support and to give those resources to girls in ways that means that you're giving them something and they can access that as they need to. Next slide. So I think the biggest thing that I want to share and that I hear over and over and over from girls is they don't always want us to fix their problems. So they're not looking for us to come in, swoop in, fix everything, make it okay, smooth it all over. They're looking for us to listen and to understand what they're going through. And so I think more than anything during this time, we need to be listening ears. We need to be open. We need to be welcoming of their emotions and feelings. We need to be comfortable that they might feel sad or angry, and we don't have to fix that. We have to empathize. We have to believe them. We have to recognize that things feel hard and complicated, and offer to help them navigate it. But right at this point, there's probably not a lot of fixing that we can do, and probably not a lot of fixing that they want. And so enhancing those lines of communication and offering opportunities for support is precisely where we want to land right now. So I thank you for the time that I had with you today. I'm helpful. I'm here if there's anything I could be helpful with. And I so appreciate the commitment that all of you have to girls in our community and to creating girls who are strong and who are leaders. And I'm honored to have a small role in that work, and look forward to the chance to hopefully see many of you in person very soon. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much. I know we were chatting a little bit before the start of the meeting today, and we were just talking about how grateful we are to have your time and your energy and your expertise to talk with us about girls. I am looking at some of the chats, and people are chatting in saying, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. So helpful. So thank you for being here with us today. So we do have time for a few questions for Lisa. So if you would like to ask a question, if you hover over the bottom of your screen, there's a QA box at the bottom of your screen. And please feel free to type in your questions. We'll monitor that and get as many of those answered as possible. And so while we wait for your questions, I do have one or two that
Sure.
I would love to get your thoughts on. So we're talking about that new normal, and there's so many things that are unknown right now. So we don't really know when this crisis is going to end. We don't have our crystal ball to say, here's what it's going to look like after this is over. So as parents and adult caregivers of our girls, how do we handle questions that maybe we don't know the answer to? We don't know what it's going to look like. Any strategies for us?
I think it's really important that we don't say everything's going to be fine. I think we often have a tendency to say that to kids, that like, this is all going to be fine and everything's going to be fine at the end. And that's actually not true. And so I think that for kids of all ages, there is a way to be honest and empathetic with them as you prepare them for the realities of what is going to happen. And so I think to say, this is really hard and things are going to look different when this is over. And I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it could look like maybe school's going to look different for you. Or maybe the way that we go to the grocery store is going to be different, because I see us wearing masks for a long time so that we're keeping ourselves safe, but keeping other people safe. So I think those interactions that we have to say in gentle and authentic ways, because I think one of the worst things we could do is tee kids up for an outcome that we have no idea what it's actually going to be or when it's going to happen. And so we don't want to say things like, oh, well, you'll definitely be able to do that by July, or our July vacation, no problem, right? Because we could elevate the negative impact. And so I think we have to find developmental ways, for the age of the child, to share that, hey, we don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to do this together. And I want you to know that even if we don't get to do that, we're going to find something fun to do as a family. Or even if you don't get to do that, we'll figure out a way to still make something special happen. So I think an honest appraisal of a situation with support and letting that person know, like, I'm here for you. Like, we're going to do this together is critical.
And then we have one other question, and I'm
Sure.
watching the Q&A here. So let's see. Let me just take a quick peek through here.
Sure.
Okay, so here's one question. Do you have any recommended resources for adults to assist them in navigating through this unprecedented time?
I do. And if it's okay, I can make up a list and share with you of some articles and some resources that I've seen recently that you could send out to the group.
That would be
I
great.
think that, you're seeing a lot of stuff online, and it's always kind of messy, especially for me to tease through, like, what's good stuff and what is just noise.
Right.
And so I, as a mental health professional, I like to look at, like, what research is telling us, of course. But some of the sites I really like, that you could just hook in online or on social media, is a Mighty Girl. So that might be one that you're already following. A Mighty Girl puts out a lot of tools and resources, book recommendations, things in that space that I think are helpful for girls. But we've been kind of putting together a little list of resources and tools on our end that we're sharing with our facilitators who are trying to make positive connections with girls in schools. And I would be happy to kind of type that up and share that with you all to send out.
That would be great. We'd really appreciate it. So we've
Sure.
had a couple questions actually coming in to that exact point, just for maybe a one-pager of some resources.
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that would be great. And for everybody who's out here watching and listening, we will make sure to get that distributed to you.
Sure.
All right, one more question before we wrap up. So this comes back to social media, and your statistic on social media, I wrote it down. It kind of blew my mind. 6 hours a day averaging in social media. That's over a week. That's like a full work week just dedicated to social media. So we're talking about people using social media a lot more during this crisis, but as we all know, social media is not always good for young girls' confidence and maybe some adult confidence too. So how do we support girls, and how do we keep their confidence up when they're using these platforms, probably even more right now?
Yeah. And so that 6 hours a day was for high school girls. So we see it steadily increase by the time they're in high school. And I think you're exactly right. Girls, we see a relationship between social media use and girls' confidence. I would imagine we would see a similar relationship between our social media use and our confidence, because it's never like you're scrolling through your social media feed and be like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better about my body right now after looking at all these Instagram models.
This is so positive. I love it, right?
We never feel that way, or they're like, ooh, my abs are like way tighter than hers, So I think there is the reality of the kinds of things that we're consuming have an impact on how we feel about ourselves. So, but what we have to be careful about right now is that this is in many ways our girls' only connection to others, right? This has now social media and TikTok and Snapchat, like those have elevated in importance because that's the only point of connection in many ways that they have. So I think it's really important that there's healthy limits that we can place on device use, period. But I also think this is a place where we can try to engage with our girls in ways that help us understand what they're getting out of the social media. And so instead of being like, oh my God, would you just put that phone away? I'm so tired of looking at you staring at that phone. Or I said no phones at dinner. Or why do you even care what those girls are saying about you on Instagram? Why does that matter? All of those things, kind of comments, separate us from the girl's current reality. And so instead of saying like, this TikTok seems so stupid, we might say, hey, I don't understand this at all, but it looks like really fun. Can you show me how to use it? Like, can you show me what it's about? Because then it has her not feel shameful about what she's doing. And it opens the door for her to not feel like it's a secret and that she can't share it with you. And so I think at this moment, I mean, it's hard to say like, well, this is how many hours they should be spending during quarantine on social media. I think that's a hard thing for me to say with any veracity. But I do think to say, hey, like, how are you connecting with your friends when you're not at school now? Like, what are the things? I would imagine that a lot of it's happening on social media or on some of your apps. Like, what are you finding that are ways to feel connected to the peers that you would see for 8 hours a day? So I do think that we have to recognize the role that this is playing for them right now, but also ensure that we are helping them navigate that in healthy ways. Because one of the things I like to do with girls is a social media audit. And so what that would mean is like you have your device and opening, and you could do it too, open to one of the feeds that you follow. So maybe it's your Instagram feed, and slowly go through that and pause at each posting. And at each post, decide, does this post make me feel better or worse about my body? Does it make me feel more or less confident about my abilities? Does it make me like or dislike other girls better? Does it make me feel more or like better or worse about my abilities, right? Because sometimes what we find is that we're just following stuff to follow stuff and not really understanding the impact, like the passive impact that some of that content is having on us. And so even taking the moment to do that audit to see the kinds of things that we're consuming, I think is a really important piece. But then also to ensure that instead of saying, you know what, you need to unfollow all that. You need to unfollow the Kardashians. You need to unfollow we might help them add positive things to their feeds, right? And figure out what are the positive, pro-social, pro-girl, strong role models and messages that we want to enter and disrupt the feed a bit. So those are a couple kind of quick strategies that come to mind for me.
Those are great. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Absolutely.
This has been great. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to take a quick stroll through the chat. There's been so much great feedback. I'm trying to watch you and watch the chat at the same time. Like my eyes are in two different places. But a couple people just said, thank you. This is great information. I appreciate the reminder to not minimize things in an effort to be reassuring. Someone else said, this is really amazing information. I have older girls. They're dealing with a lot of these issues, and now it's even harder. So the resources and the information are really helpful. So your message was so spot on today, and we appreciate you being here with us.
Thanks for having me.